We are now deeply concerned by reports of military movements taken by the Russian Federation inside of Ukraine. There will be costs for any military intervention in Ukraine.
I'm Brett Baer in Washington. This is a Fox News alert. President Obama addressing the nation less than an hour ago about reports the Russian military had entered Ukraine. We have Fox team coverage tonight on the extremely fluid situation in Ukraine, changing by the hour. Wendell Goler covers the president's brief address. But first, senior foreign affairs correspondent Amy Kellogg keeping a close eye from London on this developing story. Good evening, Amy.
Hi, Brett. Well, the warm glow of the Olympic closing ceremony has really dissipated in less than a week. The militarization of Ukraine's Crimea has probably something to do with local militia groups, protection groups, Brett, but certainly there is a Russian military presence down there. And the question and the concern is, where is it all leading?
Another jarring wake-up call in Ukraine. Armed men take over the civilian airport in Simferopol in the semi-autonomous region of Crimea, and a military airport not far from Sebastopol, where Russia bases its Black Sea Fleet, and where later some reports said 2,000 Russian troops landed. Russia says its personnel there are doing business as usual, protecting their Black Sea Fleet. Ukraine's interim government jumped to declare all this an invasion and a violation of the terms of Russia's lease of the military base.
We have the fact that there are disguised military from the Russian Black Sea Fleet illegally conducting their actions on Ukrainian territory in the Republic of Crimea. We have developed measures to neutralize this scenario.
Secretary of State John Kerry spoke to his Russian counterpart, who denied any Russian military activity was a sort of land grab in the region of Ukraine, which has strong pro-Russian sentiment.
I nevertheless made it clear that could be misinterpreted at this moment, and that there are enough tensions that it is important for everybody to be extremely careful not to inflame the situation and not to send the wrong messages.
In the meantime, Ukraine's fugitive president popped up for a press conference in Russia, claiming he is still the lawful president of Ukraine and intends to fight for the country to keep it from the, quote, pro-fascist mobs who forcibly took power with the backing of duplicitous Westerners. He denied giving the orders to shoot scores of protesters. There was even a display of emotion.
I would like to ask for forgiveness from everyone who suffered and who is suffering. If I were in Ukraine, I would bow before all the victims and meet with their families.
Brett, Yanukovych will not be having the opportunity to lay any flowers at the graves of those who died last week in all of the violence. He is wanted by the interim government for mass murder, and there are indications that they're going to do all they can to extradite him or get him back to Ukraine. Brett.
Amy Kellogg live in London. Amy, thank you. White House correspondent Wendell Goler is standing by live on the North Lawn at the White House, where President Obama in the briefing room just addressed this situation in Ukraine. Good evening, Wendell.
Good evening, Brett. The president spoke after Ukraine's ambassador to the UN confirmed reports that the White House had not wanted to take at face value earlier in the day. Press Secretary Jay Carney said at his briefing the U.S. was trying to confirm reports of Russian intervention. He repeated warnings by Secretary of State Kerry and UN Ambassador Susan Rice that such a move would be a grave mistake, and Mr. Obama echoed those warnings.
But any violation of Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity would be deeply destabilizing, which is not in the interest of Ukraine, Russia, or Europe. It would represent a profound interference in matters that must be determined by the Ukrainian people. It would be a clear violation of Russia's commitment to respect the independence and sovereignty and borders of Ukraine and of international laws.
Now, for their part, Russia warned the U.S. against getting involved. The Crimea district or area is largely ethnic Russian. The people speak the Russian language, not Ukrainian, and the sympathies are perhaps more with Moscow than Kiev. Here is Russia's ambassador to the United Nations.
I think I can say that that interference from our Western colleagues has not been helpful, and they have a certain responsibility for those dramatic consequences, and also responsibility for not following through with the agreement they themselves brought about and affixed their signatures to on February the 21st.
Here at home, Republican Senator John McCain's criticism was scalding. McCain sees another Syria in the making, where the president made a warning, this time calling Russia's action a grave mistake that he doesn't intend to back up, and maybe can't back up. McCain sees the administration as naive, and though he admits there's no military option, he feels the president invited Russian aggression.
We are seeing an intervention that is really deeply disturbing and alarming, and I don't think he thinks that the United States is going to do much, given when he looks around and see his Russian troops occupying Georgia, the failure in Syria, Iraq, around the world, and seeing American weakness and withdrawal.
Fact is, the U.S. really doesn't have much of an option in pressuring Russia beyond embarrassing them, unless we want to go back to Cold War sanctions the two countries have been dismantling. Mr. Obama reminded Moscow and Vladimir Putin the whole world was watching them a short while ago and is watching them with a different eye now.
And just days after the world came to Russia for the Olympic Games, it would invite the condemnation of nations around the world. And indeed, the United States will stand with the international community in affirming that there will be costs for any military intervention in Ukraine.
What the president has not done is picked up the phone and called Vladimir Putin. Vice President Biden called Ukraine's prime minister, but that just reaffirms the U.S. recognition of the interim government. It does not pressure Russia to do so. Brett?
So, Wendell, where's the president now?
The president speaking now, Brett, at a Democratic National Convention rally just across town. You may ask how he can hold a political speech at a time of crisis. I think the folks here would say this is Ukraine's crisis, not yet a global crisis. Brett?
Okay, Wendell Goler live in the North Lawn. Wendell, thank you. Let's go now to Wall Street Journal reporter Alan Cullison, who is on the phone in Crimea in the southern region of Ukraine. Hi, Alan, can you hear me?
Yes, fine.
Paint the picture for us there in Sevastopol. That's the area that you are.
Well, this is a city that hosts a military base of the Russian Black Sea Fleet, and there has been a lot of troop activity around here that has been off the base, heavy equipment, heavy trucks with their seals and markings taken off of them heading into Crimea itself, which are some of the indications that there is some kind of Russian involvement in what's going on here.
You know, it's important to point out there are some 10 million ethnic Russians or Russian nationals in Ukraine. I mean, that's about 20% of the population of 45 million in Ukraine. So some of those Russian troops are probably welcomed, especially in that area. But you have the current Ukrainian authorities saying that this is the beginning of an invasion or an invasion. How is this action being received on the ground?
Well, within Crimea itself, it's of course that there are certain people who, yes, would like to see unification or would like to have a Russian presence here. There are other people who just really don't, that they consider themselves Russians and are proud of being Russian, but they don't really want the Russian style of government, which everyone's familiar with, and for that reason haven't really been going for unification.
What about the president's statements? And I know just made within the past hour and a half, but there will be costs, and what that possibly could mean, and how the reaction might be there in Ukraine.
Well, I don't think the Russians will probably be buoyed by that statement because they'll consider it weak. It's really not much. I believe a Ukrainian foreign minister already called it giving the Russians a carte blanche for war, and that everyone's going to pay the consequences, including the United States. Within Ukraine, I think there's going to be quite a bit of disappointment because, the many Russians have been told many times that people are watching the situation, that the international community is concerned about things, but the Russians really aren't that worried about people being concerned, and as a matter of fact, they think it enhances their reputation.
Yeah, and it's important to point out Ukraine is key for natural gas and oil moving to Europe.
Yes, it is key, but on the other hand, I mean, you could say that Ukraine would have some sort of influence on Russia because of it, but Ukraine is also very dependent upon Russia for its gas supplies and such, and so Russia can apply a lot of pressure to Ukraine in various ways. But you know what it's doing now, essentially siding with a minority within Ukraine, and for that reason asserting its presence in Ukraine. It's not something Russia hasn't done in other places. It also invaded Georgia to supposedly help the South Ossetians and Abkhazians. They also they sustain border conflicts around their border, around their borders in order to sort of widen their influence.
Alan Cullison in Crimea, the southern part of Ukraine. Alan, thank you very much. We'll check back in. Developing situation. We'll bring you more at the bottom of the hour. Up next, as Hillary Clinton mulls a possible second try to return to the White House, a slew of secret files from that era are released to the public. But first, here's what some of our Fox affiliates across the country are covering tonight. WFLD in Chicago has the story of frozen water pipes plaguing the area. It's due, of course, to the extra long, extra cold winter. KTVU in Oakland is covering the big storm in California. Communities there that were endangered by a wildfire just weeks ago are now facing threat of mud and debris flows and mudslides. And this is a live look at WNYW in New York. The big story there tonight, the acquittal of Kerry Kennedy for drugged driving. The former wife of New York Governor Andrew Cuomo and daughter of Senator Robert F. Kennedy maintained she took a sleeping pill by mistake before a 2012 crash. That's tonight's live look outside the Beltway from Special Report. We'll be right back.